From the documentary Manufacturing Consent, a very protracted look at Professor Chomsky's speeches around the world, his statements, and his social criticism, comes forward now a part of an interview that Bill Moyers conducted with none other than Tom Wolfe, the author, who responds to the question that follows Professor Chomsky everywhere he goes. Variously stated, it essentially boils down to, who the hell do you think you are? Tom Wolfe.
This is the old cabal theory that somewhere there's a room with a baize-covered desk, and there are a bunch of capitalists sitting around, and they're pulling strings. These rooms don't exist. I mean, I hate to tell Noam Chomsky this.
You don't share that.
I think it is the most absolute rubbish I've ever heard. This is the current fashion in the universities. You know, it's patent nonsense, and I think it's nothing but a fashion. It's a way that intellectuals have of feeling like a clergy. I mean, there has to be something wrong.
Well, I actually agree with that comment. I mean, the idea that there would be a high cabal running things in a country like the United States is idiotic. That would say it is like the Soviet Union. It's totally different, which is precisely why I say the exact opposite. What I'm talking about, it's like saying the corporations try to maximize profit and market share. That's not a conspiracy. That's the institutional structure of the system. Individual decisions lead to that consequence of trying to maximize profit and market share. You don't do it, you're out of business. That's not a conspiracy, and it's not a high cabal. Now, why does Wolfe, or whoever it was, hear this as being a conspiracy? The point is that any analytic commentary on the institutional structure of the country is so threatening to the commissar class, they can't even hear the words.
Is he part of the commissar class, Tom Wolfe?
Yeah. I mean, he can't even hear the words. So if I say there is no high cabal, what he hears is there is a high cabal.
But don't you think the reason he can't hear the words is because he believes profoundly in the things he's been taught, that this is democracy, that there is freedom. It's like a lot of people like myself who used to be members of the Communist Party and who profoundly believed in the ideals and very painfully let go. Don't you think that there are a lot of honest people, Tom Wolfe being one of them, who profoundly believes in this, and he's not a member of the commissar class, he just has his ideals.
Yeah, but you see, what you're...
And you're threatening, you threaten those ideals.
But see, what you're describing in the Soviet Union is what I would call the commissar class. That is, the people who profoundly believed. I'm sure, you know, I don't know people...
average people.
Average people,
right.
But also all the way up to the editors of Pravda. If you did an in-depth analysis with them, how many of them would be total cynics?
Not many.
Yeah, that's right, because most of them completely believe. That's the way systems work. In fact, if you have, I mean, the way belief systems form, really, if you think about it, is, you know, we even know this from our personal lives. You sort of decide to do something for whatever reason, and then you create a system of beliefs that justifies it and says, yeah, I was right. Well, the end effect of this is that people who function within a system of power and authority, whether it's an editor of Pravda or an op-ed writer for the Times or a concentration camp guard or, you know, pick across the board, they're usually quite sincere about it. And they have worked up a system of beliefs which says, yes, this is just and right, and I'm completely free and independent. Yeah. If they couldn't have that system of beliefs, they couldn't continue. Now, the point is but I think when you point out that, I agree with you when you say it's a tight, closed system of beliefs. It's a kind of fundamentalism, which means you simply cannot hear critical analysis. And it's interesting to see what in the United States can't be heard. Ordinary institutional analysis, which says this is the way institutions function in a guided free market system given the distribution of power without any control, no control, you know, nobody's given orders and so on. This is the way it functions because of the way power is distributed. That's much too threatening to listen to, just as it's too threatening to hear the words the United States attacked South Vietnam or the United States orchestrated monstrous atrocities in Central America for those things. It's not allowed.
People get very emotional.
Because there are fundamentalist beliefs involved.
And yet,
can we talk about, we have only about 3 minutes left. East Timor and Cambodia. May I ask you to briefly make your case there?
Well, the case is pretty straightforward. It's as if history set up a controlled experiment. There were two major atrocities going on at the same time, same part of the world, roughly comparable in scale. One of them was an Indonesian invasion and annexation of another country, East Timor. The other was Pol Pot atrocities internal to Cambodia. The coverage was dramatically different. Coverage of East Timor declined sharply as the atrocities continued, The coverage of East Timor was pretty high before the Indonesian invasion. It then declined and hit zero in both the United States and Canada in 1970, and most of the Western world in 1978, when the atrocities really reached genocidal proportions. In Cambodia, on the other hand, there was huge publicity. Within a few weeks after the Khmer Rouge takeover, the New York Times was already denouncing genocide, when probably maybe a few hundred or 1,000 people had been killed. Well, what was the difference? The difference was, in one case, the United States was directly behind it. It was providing 90% of the arms. It was providing
East
crucial
Timor.
diplomatic
The
support.
Indonesian invasion of East Timor,
The U.S.
yes.
provided critical diplomatic support. Daniel Moynihan took pride in the fact that he prevented the UN from doing any action. He writes about it with great pride. The U.S. gave them new offers of arms. As the attack peaked, Carter sent more arms. In Cambodia, it was an enemy. You can be very moral about the atrocities committed by an enemy.
May I call your attention to, speaking of East Timor, less than 3 years ago, Amy Goodman and Alan Nairn, two reporters with whom you're familiar, Miss Goodman with Pacifica Radio, and NPR, a public listener-supported radio station, and Alan Cairn of The New Yorker, are beaten by troops who are firing on civilians around them as they assemble and march for one of the first. This is less than 3 years ago. Here is part of that report on radio. I want you to listen to this and comment on it. Just take a moment.
The Timorese, in an instant, were down. It was torn apart by the bullets. The street was covered with bodies, covered with blood, and the soldiers just kept on coming. They poured in, one rank after another. They leaped over the bodies of those who were down. They were aiming and shooting people in the back. I could see their limbs being torn, their bodies exploding. There was blood spurting out into the air, the pop of the bullets everywhere. And it was very organized, very systematic. The soldiers did not stop. They just kept on shooting until no one was left standing.
A group of soldiers grabbed my microphone and threw me to the ground, kicking and punching me. At that point, Alan threw himself on top of me, protecting me from further injury. The soldiers then used their rifle butts like baseball bats, beating Alan until they fractured his skull.
The point with only seconds left is, as is made in your documentary, this got coverage, but it wasn't much.
Not only much, it was wrong, because let's look at what happened right after that, which has not been covered. The immediate consequence of that is that Western oil companies, following the lead of their governments, entered into agreements with Indonesia to rob Timorese oil. That's exactly as if Libya had entered into an agreement with Iraq to rob Kuwaiti oil after the Kuwaiti invasion. That reported?
So what determines what the Western media covers? We'll be back next time with Noam Chomsky.